Okay, let's start with session 3 of chapter 5. In session 2, we have started with SDLC, Software Development Life Cycle. And out of the 7 phases, we discussed the first phase, which is the preliminary investigation or feasibility study. So in this session 3, we are going to discuss about systems analysis or system study. There are 3 crucial steps in the system analysis phase. Understanding the whole system. Once you understand the whole system clearly, based on that, you are going to identify how the whole system can be improved, and then develop specifications for the new system. And in the system analysis phase, it is important to know that the analysis phase addresses what will be done for the new system, not how it will be accomplished. Later in the designing phase, we'll focus on how the goals of the analysis phase will be accomplished. So during the analysis phase, you are not going to identify how you are going to accomplish these identified goals. Only thing is you are focusing on developing the specifications for the new system. So having said that, summarizing, system analysis is where you study the current system to identify how it works, find out how the old system can be improved, and determination of the requirements for the new system. So at the analysis phase, you'll be achieving these 3 objectives. System analysis is done by the systems analyst. System analyst is a unique person as he or she acts as a coordinator between the business side and the IT side of the company. She has to collaborate with end users and IT staff to evaluate computer system and decide drawbacks of the old system and to improvements required by the new system. So the duty or the job of the system analyst includes to collaborate with the end users and the IT staff to evaluate the computer system and to decide identify the drawbacks of the old system and identify the improvements required by the new system. In order to achieve this task properly, system analyst should have these skills: analytical skills, technical skills, managerial skills, and interpersonal skills. So if anyone wants to work in the industry as system analyst, should gain these skills in order to achieve the task properly. Okay, having said that, for you to study the existing system, for you to conduct a good study, you need data. When talking about data, there are mainly 2 types of data that you collect related to the existing system: primary data and secondary data. Primary data are the data that is being originally collected by the analyst or the researcher for his or her own study. If someone is collecting data originally for his or her own study, we call that data as the primary data. Unprocessed data you originally collect for your research or for your analysis. Then also you can collect secondary data related to the existing system. Secondary data are the data that is being collected by somebody else for some other reason and available for you to use. Now this data you are not going to collect originally, but it has been collected by somebody else for some other reason and available for you to use. So this data or the secondary data is already processed. So there are various techniques that you can use to collect primary and secondary data. Let's see what are these techniques that you can use to collect these two types of data. To collect primary data, you can conduct interviews, you can have questionnaires as well as observations. And for you to collect secondary data related to your project, you can use the method of record review. Right. So let's wind up this session. In the next session, chapter 5, session 4, we are going to discuss in detail these techniques, data collection techniques, interviews, questionnaires, observations, and record reviews. Thanks for listening. Let's start with chapter 5, session 4. During this chapter, we are going to discuss about some data collection techniques. First, we are going to move the record review of data collection. This is a method that we'll be using to collect secondary data, as we discussed in the previous session. What is secondary data? Data that is being collected by somebody else for some other reason and available for you to use. Documentation of an existing system is a useful starting point in the early stages of the analysis, since many system manuals present an overview of the current system. So by reviewing the available documentations related to the existing system, it helps you to get a general understanding of your existing system. Other than this, there are two other important advantages of this method. One is these documentations are freely available, easily accessible, and also they are portable. So you can take the documentations, you can take your own time and review these documentations. When talking about documentations, you can consider policy manuals, instruction manuals, job descriptions and staff duties, previous reports, previous investigations, policy manuals, not only those, system documentations, user manuals also you can consider for the record review. So with that, we can move to the next technique that we are going to use in data collection, which is the interview method of data collection. Interview method is a method to collect primary data. What is primary data? Data that is being originally collected by the researcher or the analyst for his or her own study. This data is not collected by somebody else, but you are going to collect your own data for your analysis. So interview is a formal meeting between two people, and it is the best source of qualitative information. And also the interview method is considered as a most important tool used by the system analyst for a system study. In order to get better results, you need pre-preparation. Without pre-preparation, you won't be able to come up with a productive interview. So let's move. What are the things that you can do as pre-preparation? So the pre-preparation should include this: definition of the purpose of the interview. You have to have a clear understanding of why you are going to conduct this interview. What are your gray areas and why you do this interviews? Okay, I have issues. I need to clarify further this particular area. So to get information on this particular area, I'm going to conduct this particular interview. So you have to have a clear understanding of why you do this interview. And once you identify the gray area in which that you are going to clarify, then you can list out the people to be interviewed. So if you need to get some information that is related to the top management level, no point of interviewing the clerical staff. In that case, you have to interview the managerial positions. If the area that you need to clarify is related with the clerical staff, no point of asking such questions from the managers. So number one, once you identify, okay, I need to clarify this particular area, purpose of my interview is to get information on this, then you need to identify the people whom you should interview to get the best result. And also, before you go for the interview, a degree of homework which include a full understanding of the technical terms is a necessity. Now say for example, if there are certain technical terms that you may use within your interview, if that does not understood by your respondent, if he cross-questioned, what does it mean? If you were unable to give the answer, the trust will break down, or the person may not understand your question properly, hence he may not be able to give the correct answer. So before you go for the interview, if there are technical terms that you will be using within the interview or related to that area, you have to have a clear understanding of all the technical areas. And the other thing, before you go to the interview, you have to review of documentations and the preparations of questions to be asked during the next interview. By reviewing the documentations, as we discussed in the previous slide, you get a general understanding, overall understanding of the area of the existing system. Then with that overall understanding, you can find out your gray areas. This area is not clear with the documentation, so I need to clarify this particular part. And to clarify this particular part, what are the questions that I'm going to ask from the respondent? And when talking about interviews, you can classify interviews based on two factors. One is how it is designed, and the second one is how it is carried out. Let's move to discuss about this classification. First, we'll discuss how the interviews are classified based on how it is designed. There are mainly three: structured, unstructured, and semi-structured. So structured interviews, in structured interviews, there are predefined set of questions to be asked, and time frame and list of questions within that time frame is predefined. Now say for example, okay, during this interview I'm going to cover this area. To cover this area, these are the questions that I'm going to ask. Say you are given half an hour for the interview, then you break down that half an hour into sub time frames. Within first 5 minutes, this is the area that I'm going to cover. To cover this area, I'll be asking these set of questions. And within the next 15 minutes, I need to clarify this gray area. For that, these are the list of questions that I will be asking. Now you have completed, out of the half an hour, you have completed now 20 minutes. So the remaining 20 minutes I'm going to clarify this particular section, and these are the questions that I'm going to ask within the final 20 minutes. Likewise, the interview is very well structured. When considering unstructured interviews, where you get a lot of open-ended questions and you allow the respondent to speak, and there is a lot of probing facility, you can probe until you clearly understand the point. So when comparing these two, structured and unstructured, there are certain advantages and disadvantages for both. In structured interviews, the main advantage is within the given time period, you can make sure that you have covered all your areas that you have planned to get the details about, because for each time frame you have set of questions to be asked. And the disadvantage of this structured interview is there is less probing facility. Once that time frame is finished, you jumped into the next section. Whether you are clear with the previous section or not, you simply jump to the next section. Contradictorily, in unstructured interviews, say you are given half an hour to ask questions, but during the entire half an hour you might have cleared out only one particular question. You ask the problem, you ask the question, let the respondent to speak, and while he is speaking, if there are certain unclear areas, you can keep on probing and getting the information, which means you can get very in-depth answers for one particular area, but you might not be able to cover everything that you plan to cover within the given time period. So finally, there is semi-structured interviews. Interview is partially pre-planned. In the semi-structured interviews, you have roughly allocated the time frames, and there is rough guideline of the questions that you are going to ask, but in certain areas, if you need further clarifications, you can probe your respondent. So based on how it is designed, there are 3 types: structured interviews, unstructured interviews, and semi-structured interviews. And based on how it is carried out, again you can break down interviews into 3. One is face-to-face interview, where you go meet the person and get the information required. Second one is voice-to-voice interviews. For example, over the phone you can interview a person. Last one is screen-to-screen interviews. For example, WhatsApp, through WhatsApp, Viber, webinars, those sort of technologies you can use. So that's all we are going to discuss in session 4. We'll discuss about questionnaires and observation method of data collection in chapter 5, session 5. Right, now we are moving into chapter 5, section 5. In chapter 5, section 4, we have discussed 2 techniques for data collection, that is record review and interview method of data collection. So in this section we are going to discuss about questionnaire method of data collection and observation method of data collection. So questionnaire method of data collection again is a technique that can be used for primary data collection. The main advantage of questionnaire method is it helps to collect information from a large group. And within a questionnaire, you can have 2 types of questions: structured questions or closed-ended questions, unstructured questions or open-ended questions. Let me show these 2 types with an example. So closed-ended questions or structured questions where the respondent can directly provide the answer. When you ask the age, you can simply say it's 25 or 46 or 79, whatever. Date of birth also you can directly give an answer. So these are closed-ended questions. Sex, ethnicity, all these are closed-ended or structured questions. Open-ended questions, such as where it expects the users to describe the answer. There is no direct answers. What is your opinion about the SQA implementation within your organization? So you can't directly say something, as you said for your age. For your age, you can directly say it's 25. But for this, you have to explain. So this type of questions we called open-ended questions, and these types we called close-ended question or structured questions and unstructured questions. And when creating your questionnaire, you must focus on having structured questions as much as possible rather than including unstructured questions. You can have very few number of unstructured questions, but most of the questions should be in the format of closed-ended or structured questions. Let's see the reason for this. We'll first discuss about characteristics of a good questionnaire. Should provide information to cover the objective. So within your questionnaire, we should ask questions only to cover your objective. You should not ask unnecessary questions. For example, if you are to collect data about agile software development, so with that objective in the questionnaire, you should not ask the personal details of the person, marital status, number of children. Those things are not relevant to your objective. So you should ask questions only to cover your objective. Should not be too lengthy and should be able to fill within a short period. Now if you include lot of unstructured questions, the respondent may not be able to fill it within a short period. And also say if you had lot of structured questions for about 2-3 pages, again it takes a lot of time to fill. And whenever a respondent sees the length of your questionnaire, they may be reluctant to fill your questionnaire. So you have to create very precise questionnaires. It should not be too lengthy and should be able to fill within a short period. Otherwise, you will get a very low response rate, because it is not a necessity for the respondent to fill your questionnaire. You simply distribute it and then you collect the papers, or you ask them to email back. So if it is too lengthy and if they feel that it will take long time to fill it out, they will not fill your questionnaire. Should not have ambiguous questions. You should not ask doubtful questions within your questionnaire. For example, how many corona patients can be found tomorrow? So it's a very doubtful question. You cannot guess and say the number. So you should not ask such questions in your questionnaire. Should be easily understood. Your objective is to get the responses as much as possible and the correct responses. So if you ask questions with high-tech words and if it is not understandable by your respondent, he may just fill it something. Just put a cross in front of something. So it may not be the correct answer. Or the respondent may not fill out your questionnaire. So when preparing your questionnaires, you should prepare the questions that should be very easily understood. Should not contain words with vague meaning. So your questionnaire should not contain words with vague meaning. You should have objective questions, not subjective questions within your questionnaire. For example, if you ask, is it a hot day today? It is subjective to person. It's not a objective question. But the same question you can ask, what is the temperature today? So if it is 38 degrees Celsius, that is 38 degrees Celsius for everyone. But if you ask, it is a hot day, some people might say no, some people might say yes. So it should not contain words with vague meaning. Should be capable of getting precise answers. It should be capable of getting direct answers, precise answers. You can use the same example. What is the temperature today? So you can give a direct answer for that. Question should not require calculations to be made. Now within your questionnaire, you should not ask after how many years of marriage you got your first baby. So the same question you can ask, when did you get married and when did you get your first baby? Then you can do the calculation for yourself. So one other important characteristic of a good questionnaire is questions should not require calculations to be made. And also minor or related questions should follow the main question. So at the place where you are asking about the person's educational qualification, you should not ask his or her family details. At the place where you are asking the family details of the person, you should not ask that person's working details, employment details. So minor or related questions should follow the main question. So these are few points that you have to consider when creating your questionnaire. Now let's see what are the advantages of this questionnaire method of data collection. Advantages: low cost, easy to manage, can collect information from a large number of people. This is the main advantage of questionnaire method. You can distribute this questionnaire to hundreds and thousands of people. When moving into disadvantages of questionnaire method, low response rate. Once we distributed the questionnaires for 1,000 respondents, might be 200 to 100 people will respond you. Doubtful responses can be there. So someone who is not really interested filling your questionnaire, maybe just put ticks in front of the middle part. So for example, say you have strongly agree, agree, disagree. One person should just tick on the mid part, which is agree. So rather than even reading the questions, just might have put crosses in the middle. Can be biased responses, less probing facility. So you don't know who filled them. You will be collecting the questionnaires, and then you cannot ask cross questions. You just distribute the questionnaire and then you collect them. Less accuracy, the same thing. Some people might simply check on the boxes without even reading the questions. So whatever it is, questionnaire method is also one very important technique that we can use to collect primary data, and it is mainly important for us to collect information from a large number of people. With that, we can move to the next technique, which is the observation method of data collection. As we discussed, observation again is a method of collecting primary data. So observation means where you record what really happens while it is happening. So this can take place in a laboratory setting or in a natural setting. When talking about observations, there are mainly two types of observations: participatory observation and non-participatory observation. Participatory observation means you yourself, being a member of the target group, collects the information. For example, if I need to collect data about the lecturers of NIBM from the perspective of the students, I can be in the class as a student and collect the data when the lecturers are doing their lectures. So that belongs to participatory observation. So there is one very famous professor in Sri Lanka, Professor Nandasena Ratnapala, and his very famous participatory observation research was the research about Sri Lankan beggars. In order to collect data for this particular research, professor himself has lived with the beggars for years to collect data for his own research. So that type of a research, that type of a data collection we call participatory observation. Then the second type is non-participatory observation, where as an outsider you watch what is happening or what people are doing. Now say for example, again the previous example, two examples if you consider, you need to find out the teachings of NIBM teachers from the perspective of the students. You don't have to be in the class as a student, but from outside you can watch what is happening and you can collect your data. Even the professors, Sri Lankan beggars, rather than being and living with the beggars, he could have observed what the beggars are doing and collect the data. So this is an example for non-participatory observation, where you are not a member of the target group, but as an outsider you observe what happens and collects your data. Participatory observation, where you being a member of the target group, while being the member of the target group you collect the data that you want. So this is non-participatory, you are an outsider. Participatory, you collect data while being with the target group. Let's move to advantages and disadvantages of participatory observation. Advantages: collect data where and when an event or activity is occurring. And the main important point, there are 2 points: does not rely on people's willingness or ability to provide information. If it is a questionnaire, if it is an interview, getting the information relies on the person's willingness or ability to provide the information. Here you are not asking anything from anyone, you observe and you collect your own data. So it does not rely on people's willingness or ability to provide information. And the other most important thing is, allows you to directly see what people do rather than relying on what people say that they did. So if you ask someone something, he can say certain things which he has not done as the things that he did. But with the observation method, that won't happen. You are not asking from people what they did, but you observe and you collect your data. When moving into disadvantages of observation method, susceptible to observer bias. So we see the world from our own perception. So that problem is there in observation method. Based on my viewpoint, I collect the data. And also can be expensive and time consuming compared to other data collection methods, because you have to wait until it really happens to collect the required data for your research or your analysis. So with that we can conclude the data collection techniques. We have discussed 4 data collection techniques: record review, which is a method to collect secondary data; interviews, questionnaires and observation, 3 techniques that can be used for collect primary data. So with that we can wind up section 5 of chapter 5. Have a nice day.